welcome to the Kitsap Literary Artisan Writers and its monthly author showcase. I'm your host, J.W. Capek, and today we have the guest of editor Jennifer Hager, and she's meeting with us here at the VCAT Studios in Bremerton. Jennifer and I first met at the Fields End Speaker Series in October of 2014 at the Poulsbo Regional Library. Since that time, Jennifer helped me edit my first science fiction novel, The Deerware Awakening, and she's been active with very many local authors. So we're really fortunate to get a chance to talk about the editor and where the editor works with the novels.
This is really a pleasure.
Many of our authors grew up saying that, oh, I grew up wanting to be a writer. I really wanted to write. Did you grow up wanting to be an editor?
That's a good question. I was so drawn to a well-written story where I could really identify with the main character and vicariously have this adventure with the character. And everything that I do in editing is really aimed at how can we use language and skills to make that happen in people's books.
Please describe the different levels of the editing process. Developmental, structural, substantive, line editing, copy editing, all of the different factors, because different editors have different specialties.
Yes, they do. Well, I think the one that people often don't know about or haven't heard about is developmental editing, which focuses on all the big picture issues, the structure of the narrative, the themes, the character development, the character arcs for each, for your main character especially. And there are often things that could be shaped in a different way. So the developmental editor rarely makes marks in a manuscript, but they will add questions or they will make suggestions about what needs to be done with the text.
And some of the other types of editing.
Yes, substantive editing and line editing. Substantive editing employs the same big picture look at the writing, but it moves things around within the text and, might change language. When I worked for a small magazine in the 80s, I remember I would have different articles that came from non-native English speakers. And it was really important for me to collaborate with that author so that what we published was easily understood by the native English speakers. So there was a lot of, changing the sentence structure or things like that.
Copy editing?
Copy editing is editing for all the mechanical errors in a piece of writing. So this includes, of course, things like spelling, grammar, syntax, sentence structure, and there are many other things as well, like use of punctuation, capitalizations, italics. Do we use numerals or spell out the numbers? And all of those things are done by the copy editor usually according to some kind of a style guide. But the one that I use the most for print books is the Chicago Manual of Style. It's a big fat one on the top. And most general fiction uses this style. So this will guide the editor in making things consistent throughout a manuscript. And it's really nice to have a style guide. Yeah.
I know being consistent, particularly in my novel, because I have different pronouns that I'm using, was very difficult to keep track of which character had which pronoun, and that was something else that we had to work on.
Right.
One author has observed that, quote, just having an English degree does not make an editor.
No.
Would you agree?
I agree with you. Sometimes you need an editor who is scrappy and a good sleuth, and someone who's going to ferret their way to figure out how to correct something. Sometimes you need a person who's good at envisioning something beyond what is there, like in the work that I do. I jumped with you into this world and then asked a ton of questions to help pull out of your imagination. You had it all. But, you know, it's hard to get everything into the manuscript.
I've heard from many people who would love to write. They come up to me and they say, oh, I wish I could write a book. And they just don't know how to start or where their story really begins. Would a developmental editor be the one to contact at this point when they need to, or would they need to make a first draft before they could go to an editor?
Well, the place to pull in an editor, in my mind, there are 3 different places where people call me. And one of them is when an author is just in the idea stage of formulating what is this story going to be about. And if the author is a sort of person who is energized through conversation and can brainstorm, then it's possible to work together and have some, flurry of conversation. And usually you start with either the premise for the book or a main character whom you're working with. And then the developmental editor and the author brainstorm the whole story, and the first thing they do is they write the synopsis. They make the most compelling synopsis that they can, and quite a few professional writers do this. And then when they begin to write, they know with each chapter, I'm writing into such and such, I'm writing toward this goal. The second place where people contact me is when they have completed a whole draft, maybe even this is the 6th or 7th or whatever, and take it as far as they can, and then they just think, what next? And that's the time when it's really good to have another set of eyes. And the third instance is if you write yourself into a corner, you're stuck, and then it's very, very helpful to have someone else just look at where you are, look at what you've done, and say, hey, I see 4 or 5 different ways you can get out of here. Is that helpful?
Oh, yes. I was thinking back on some of the interactions you and I had when we were working with that book and making those steps forward. This is a big question. How does software editing differ from a human editor? Is there a difference between that human and the various editing and correction software programs that are now being offered?
There are some very fine programs out there. And depending upon what kind of writing you're doing, you may really want to make use of some of those. I won't name them now, but there are quite a few. And I'm assuming that most of you who are watching are writing some kind of a book. And if you were working on policies that needed to be disseminated through a department of a corporation, use the software, because it will make a simple, cohesive message with no fluff that's clear and concise, and it doesn't have to sound like you. But if you're writing a book, it's a whole different thing. First of all, you have characters, each of whom you hope is going to be distinct and unique. And you want your reader, when they hear what that character says, you want them to know immediately, oh yeah, that's Norel, right? And your editing software is going to edit the uniqueness right out of that passage. And one more thing, many agents with whom I've spoken have said that one of the things they're really looking for when they pick up a new book is they want to hear the voice what's the voice that's telling this story? The voice contains a perspective, it contains a way of looking at the world, a certain way of, understanding life. It's elusive, but it's very important.
Mm-hmm. I've heard the word, "Where's your voice?" mentioned many times, but you just explained it very well to what we're really trying to do when we explain and put our voice into our writing. What are the recommendations that you can have for an author to seek out an editor? Are there professional organizations or to consider? I remember you mentioning having a trial between you and an editor before you go into a full project.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, we're really lucky in our region because we have a professional league of editing professionals, nearly 400 people, in a group called the Northwest Editors Guild, that can be found at www.edsguild.org. And this is a group, many of them are freelancers, and it's helpful. I just name this as a valuable resource because there's information on the website that can help any writer understand, well, what are the next steps after I've written? How do you find an editor? How do you vet possible editors you could partner with? But I'll just tell you that one thing to know is that most freelance editorial professionals are booked out 2 or 3 months in advance. So it's valuable to just have that in your mind and stop and try to connect with editors. Speak to 3 or 4 at least and find someone with whom you feel you could really work.
I know you talked about that particularly with your work with the author of If I Could Give You a Day, and how the two of you did a trial first and then felt really very comfortable with each other and then went on. And one of the things that David did was bring in a sample of all the different things and work that you had done together that was printed out, and that was very meaningful at that meeting. Most authors I've met they're driven to become accepted and successful in the publishing world with books, with screenplays. What are your goals as an editor?
My goals?
Your goals.
I think I want to contribute most to stories that help their readers widen their perspectives, digest their experience for healing, for growth, for connection, for all those things. And it's really a privilege to help to midwife these stories into the world.
I like that, midwife for the book.
Yeah.
When you're editing a story, do you ever get personally involved in the story, either positive or negative?
Well,
would that affect your editing?
You know me better than to ask this question.
That's why I asked the question.
Oh, okay. I choose projects because I feel personally involved. I'm jazzed about the story. I'm interested in how it starts, where it goes, what are the things that the characters will have to work through. And I just want to say, when you're seeking an editor to work with you, you want to look for someone who's really interested in your genre, interested in the type of story that you've produced, and somebody who will give it keen attention, keen interest, and really meet you in terms of the intensity of your love for this thing.
Being a writer was kind of an extension of my previous career as a teacher, but I'm wondering, what do you enjoy most about editing that uses the skills you brought with you to this particular position?
Here, let me turn this question around.
Okay.
First, I'll tell you what I like least.
Okay. Okay.
when I'm stuck with some copy editing, some very niggling details of copy editing, it's really a chore to go sifting through this, 1,000-page thing to try to find how to solve it. So that's the hard part. But the wonderful part are the collaborations. Absolutely.
Well, these past years have shown a remarkable change in the publishing world. Editors used to be employees of a major book publisher who picked the books and gave them to an editor to work with the person. Now there are independent book publishers, there's self-publishers who work directly with the distributors and marketing, internet connections, social media, online purchases. All of these things have dramatically changed how an author's work will be published. Audiobooks and ebooks are replacing the hardbound copies of ebooks and of paperbacks and hardbound books. How has all of this change affected the idea and the work of editors?
Oh, it's been huge, Janice. Sometimes I think of what's happened to the publishing industry as an earthquake in slow motion. But as major publishers narrow down the people they have on staff, then it means that you have a lot of people with huge proficiencies who are working as freelancers. And so if you know where to look or how to look, it's possible to find really excellent people. Many of the folks I have worked with on books have either worked in in-house publishers, they've had in-house positions, or they've been agents for several years, and it's really helpful to be able to get freelancers who've worn several different hats. Yeah.
With the types of publication now, for example, if you're going to edit a book that's going to turn into an audiobook, that's going to turn into a game, that's going to be turned into some kind of a trailer, and then maybe it'll go into a series, how does that affect your looking at the book to start with?
Oh, boy, that question is beyond me.
I think I added it.
That's okay. But the good thing is that if we really work on making the strongest possible story, then it could be adapted, right? It could be adapted to all these different things, screenplay or whatever.
Because our language is changing so rapidly with tech terms, pronouns in my book, language overlaps from different languages. Is there a way that you can try to keep ahead of it, or do you just have to go with the flow of it?
Boy, well, as you probably know, dictionaries and style guides are not the language police. They simply need to reflect what is the current usage that makes sense, right? And this is hard for some of us diehards. I love certain words, and when they're misused, I just get upset. But in the dictionary, with each successive edition of something like Webster's Collegiate Dictionary, there are always tons of new entries, and some of them may be words like there's regardless and irregardless, right? The word enormity has meant something so horrific that it can hardly be imagined. We speak about the Holocaust as being, the enormity of what was done. But now it's becoming more and more commonplace for writers to use the word enormity when what they mean is immensity. So it's important, if you work with words a lot, get the most recent dictionary. get the most recent style guide, okay? That's the best.
How many authors and projects can you work with at a time?
Without going crazy.
Without going crazy.
I can juxtapose some copy editing work, which uses one side of my brain, with a very intense developmental edit of a manuscript, a full-length manuscript. I've found that if I have two full-length manuscripts going on at the same time, it's very hard to keep the boundary lines clear. Does that make sense? And I also have, I do writing coaching. So that's an ongoing, collaboration with someone. And those I can handle quite a few while I'm doing these other things.
Well, mentioning the writing coaching, you have spoken at a number of literary presentations, and that's where I saw you originally with, at the library. And you're active with the Bainbridge Artisans Resource Network, or BARN. What does your upcoming teaching and working and schedule look like?
Well, it's very slim at the moment.
Oh.
I have a 3-hour workshop that I'm teaching on October 12th at the Bainbridge Island Resource Network, BARN. And it's just a self-editing workshop for people who have written some kind of a manuscript and are eager to know how to, put on another pair of glasses to see their manuscript differently. So I'm really looking forward to that.
Have you ever wanted to write a book yourself?
Oh, yes, I have a few books in my mind, but sometimes I think writing is an exercise we do in part to understand and digest our experience. And some of the things, all the things that I've wanted to write about are autobiographical things. And sometimes I manage to compost those experiences in other ways, and I never get to write the book.
If a book club or other organization wanted to invite you to speak, how can they contact you?
At my website, at my email address, which is jhager, Hager, .editor, editor, @gmail.com.
Okay. Anything else that you'd like to ask or add?
I just want to really encourage anyone who's writing and doing their darndest from day to day, and don't be afraid to involve other people, one or two, maybe a writing critique group, maybe someone like an old English teacher, somebody who could be a mentor, because I think it's when we begin to share our writing and take in feedback that our awareness of our craft just grows.
I believe that's something I did take from our working together. When I started writing books, I thought, this is my story. I'm going to write it my way. And I really didn't realize how whatever I write might attract or detract to an audience. The person who reads that might not see it the way I did. They might not see my story the way I thought I was telling it. And by working with an editor, working with you, I found, some of the ways I express my story isn't the same as someone else might read it. And that was something to learn, that the reader, whoever that reader is, wherever they are, whenever they pick up your book and read it, they are an important part of what you thought you were telling. Thank you so much, Jennifer, for coming, for all that you do in the literary world, and for coming out to record this program. I'd like to thank all our viewers as well. Jennifer Hager was here today, and the BCAT staff is here every time we tape. I'd like to thank our viewers for tuning in to the Bremerton Kitsap Access Television and viewing this Kitsap Literary Artists and Writers production. It's Claw. With the fall, there will be numerous bazaars and reading activities with authors and artists. There are opportunities to meet with them personally. BCAT is also programming special holiday events with Claw. I wish to thank the BCAT staff on cameras and in the director's chair. Our broadcasts are scheduled for Saturday evenings at 6 p.m. Pacific Time on Wave Cable Channel 3 and Comcast Channel 12. The Claw program is also currently scheduled for Wednesday mornings at 9 a.m. on Pacific Time. It's possible to stream the Claw program live through the https bcat.vibit.com or through the live channels mentioned on the BCAT program page. So please, thank you for coming. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being with us tonight. I hope, or Wednesday morning, whichever you're seeing this, I hope everybody has a pleasant and productive and fascinating week and will read or listen, might be listening to a good book. Until Saturday, I am J.W. Capek with the Kitsap Literary Artists and Writers in conjunction with Bremerton Kitsap Television, and good evening.